Hey, Sens fans, welcome to Season 5, Episode 11 of the Senstennial Podcast. Today, we are excited to welcome back news editor for The Score, Josh Wegman. Josh, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How about you guys?
Not too Well, I mean, we're here to talk about the Sens, so maybe a little shabby.
I was going to say personally, fantastic.
Oh, there we go.
Sens fandom wise, it's pretty bad. I'm not going to lie.
Well, you can't win them all, right?
We can't win
It would be
many.
nice to win some at least.
I think today the Sens were practicing 3-on-3, and somebody was like, "Oh man, it would be nice to even get to overtime." And I was like, "Hey, you know what? When they get to overtime or shootout, they're 3 for 3, so they need to get to overtime, shootout much more often. Maybe they'd have a few more wins on the board." But today we wanted to start things off and ask you about your thoughts on Ottawa's coaching change. Of course, DJ Smith had been here for quite some time, and in late December got let go along with assistant coach Davis Payne, who was running the power play. And instead, Jacques Martin, who is a senior advisor to the coaching staff, he steps in as the interim head coach. And Daniel Alfredsson, I don't think he needs much of an introduction, but he becomes the new assistant coach for the Sens and starts running the new power play. So, really, what are your thoughts on all those changes behind the bench for the Sens?
Starting with DJ Smith, he obviously had to go, and I think that was long overdue, and it was probably too late. I thought they should have fired him last year after the slow start, but it was sort of understandable with the ownership in flux to not make any major changes until that was settled. So I sort of understood that. But after the really poor start to this season, I thought they would make a change earlier and try and save their season while it's still salvageable, kind of like Edmonton did, pulling the shoot on Woodcroft pretty early. So I thought it was just too late to kind of save this season. Like it was already a long shot to make the playoffs by that point. I think bringing in Martin was fine given the scenario. You know, he's not your long-term head coach, but he's a guy the organization trusts and he can provide some intel on maybe what's needed. And, you know, he's a guy when he was coaching the Sens back in the day and even during Florida and Pittsburgh, he was always really smart defensively and very detailed. And I think that's what this team kind of needs is some more structure and especially on the defensive end. So bring him in just for the rest of this year. I don't think that's like the worst thing, as long as it's certain that he won't be the guy moving forward. Obviously, never hurts to bring in a guy like Alfredsson. I don't know if he wants to, if coaching is something he wants to do long term. It seems like he kind of has that ability in the organization where whatever sort of department he wants to work in the future, he can do that. So bringing him in on the bench definitely does not hurt having a guy like that, Hall of Famer, obviously. So
On that note, also want to get your thoughts on, Jacques Martin, not just from behind the bench, but when speaking with media, he's been quite transparent regarding his displeasure for the team, general performance across the board. He's talked about in general the losing of the team over the last handful of years and really wanting to cut bad habits. And he has had, what do you call that? No, he's not pulling any punches when it comes to talking to media. He's done a few interviews on the radio as well, and he hasn't missed a beat there either. So, is that something that you find interesting? What do you think about him being so vocal?
well, as someone in the media, I obviously love it because it gives us something to write about if he's, not mincing words and stuff like that after losses. So in that sense, it's great. But I also don't mind it because, again, maybe after this season, he moves just back into an advisory role. But I mean, the guy's 71 years old. He doesn't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. He's just kind of calling it how he sees it. And I think kind of that's what this team needs a little bit. So I like it personally. And all the stuff he's saying too, like he's right a lot. Like this team has
Yeah.
a lot of work to do, and specifically defensively, there's some issues. So it's not like he's wrong and just you know spewing garbage. He's saying accurate stuff. Is just being very honest with it, which I think everyone should be able to appreciate.
And I think a lot of the stuff that he is saying is sort of breaths of fresh air for the fan base. I think it was after game 2, Drake Batherson was being interviewed and said, I did something wrong and Jacques came over and told me what I did and how to change it. And everybody on Sens Twitter was losing their goddamn mind, because it's, one of the first times we're hearing, it's not an attaboy and keep doing your best. It's a teachable moment and how to improve. And I think Jacques has been awesome for those sound bites recently. And, being a part of the media, it's always going to be great to get to write about that. And I hope, those sound bites and all of these changes that we're hearing about we finally see on the ice soon enough. Obviously, it's been a tough go as Sens fans recently, losing way too many games and not winning nearly enough. And then alongside the Jacques Martin and Alfie hirings, you have Steve Staios recently being named full-time GM, as well as being the president of hockey operations, and then hiring Dave Poulin, TSN analyst, who is coming in as the vice president of hockey operations. So what are your thoughts on that? And do you really think Staios is going to stay GM, or is this just a for the time being type deal?
I mean, if I had to guess, I would say it's like a full-time thing, and he's going to be the GM for a while. I mean, this is a guy Andlauer handpicked, obviously, to first start as president of hockey ops, I believe it was. And you see this all the time, not only in sports, not just hockey, you see this in business all the time. When someone takes over a company or a sports team, they want to hire people they know and people they've worked with before. And obviously, Andlauer worked with Staios, with Hamilton, and I was listening to Poulin on TSN radio here, and he was talking about how he's known Andlauer for 10 or 20 years. And he's known Staios, obviously, just from, being in the business. But so it's not surprising that Andlauer is surrounding himself with people he knows and people he's comfortable with. And Poulin seems like a smart guy, even when he was an analyst, and he's worked in front offices before, so that seems like a good hire. Yeah, Staios again seems like a bright mind. I'm interested to see what he can do, and with his first full off season coming up and the deadline coming up, we're gonna kind of get a sense of what direction he wants to take and what kind of players he wants to surround this core with.
And what's interesting, and we'll maybe talk about trades or lineup shakeups in a little bit, but going back to the coaching, when the change was initially made, they said that they didn't want to make a change beforehand because they kind of wanted their search for a general manager to, conclude or what have a general manager pick which coach they wanted going forward. And that obviously will likely still happen. But it's kind of interesting that they talk about looking for a general manager and they didn't want to make any changes to the coaching staff until they had one in place. But then Staios ends up staying in place as GM. And so, if he was putting the medal on himself type deal and going to be the GM anyway, why they didn't make that change behind the bench sooner. It just seems a little peculiar is all.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess they just wanted to go through the entire process of looking for external options as GM or other people within the organization before deciding on Staios, and then you just want to go through that whole process. And I think the thing with, even though there's some like urgency from the fan base to want to try and win as soon as possible, because this team is built that it should be able to be more competitive right now. Andlauer's fresh on the job. He probably wants to evaluate things and not make any rash decisions, I guess. So he's probably just, first year on the job, trying to take it one day at a time, I guess.
I think to your point about, having a bit of a robust search for GM, Ian Mendez just wrote an article about the process, and it actually seemed like there wasn't one. And Andlauer really just felt like the guy he wanted was already with the team. And, there's been this talk about a, twin-headed monster approach. And now I guess that twin-headed monster is Steve Staios and Dave Poulin. But I have to agree with every sentiment that if you knew that this was the guy that you wanted to go with, and you already, like, even if you were going to fire your GM, you could have named him the next day and probably saved you, at least 3 weeks of losses with DJ Smith. And that's kind of the frustrating thing. I understand the patient approach and wanting to bring in Jacques as a consultant and see what he can do with some of his words of wisdom to DJ. But at what point do you need to pull the chute so you can save the season?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, knowing that there's no reason a change couldn't have been made earlier.
Yeah.
And even if you were still considering other options at GM, you still could have, if Jacques Martin was going to be the guy you were going to bring in, you still could have hired him, kind of knowing, again, this is a rest of the season type of thing, barring some sort of impeccable run where you go and make the playoffs and get super hot in the second half, like something crazy like that. I feel like bringing in Martin was always going to be a temporary fix. So that bringing him in shouldn't have altered your thinking of hiring a GM.
And do you think, now that we have our full-time GM as well as full-time president of hockey operations, that there is a good coaching fit for the Sens on the market right now, or wait till the end of the season? Obviously, as you said, I don't think Martin is the long-term solution, and he's probably going to dictate a lot of what happens. But is there anybody that kind of sticks out to you right now?
I personally think, I think, like you said, they'll probably wait till the offseason to see what other candidates are out there. Maybe, maybe someone else gets fired who they like. But I personally think this team needs a veteran coach and an experienced coach, just because there's so much talent in this group and there's clearly just not enough defensive structure. So I really think you need a veteran guy who's been there and done that and had success, where the players are going to respect him right away. Maybe like a Craig Berube would be a good fit. He's a hard-nosed guy. He's not going to take any shit. Even Dean Evison got let go in Minnesota. Less of a name, but always had a good defensive team with Minnie. And even maybe a couple guys who have been out of jobs this year, and in some cases a little longer, but like maybe Gerard Gallant, maybe Claude Julien. I don't know if that would excite the fan base much, but those are guys who know how to coach and have done it in the league for a while. And I just think experience will be very important when picking the next coach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of Sens fans want the same. I know there are rumors about, and forgive me for not remembering his name, but the coach of the Marlies, I know his name has come up.
John Gruden.
John Gruden.
Thank you.
Not the football coach, John Gruden.
He's both. It's,
But the father of former Sens prospect.
Oh, okay. I remember
also named John Gruden.
Was it Josh Gruden?
I don't know. I remember though when Ottawa drafted him.
Actually, I think it was John Gruden. I think it's John Gruden Jr.
Yeah, because when he was drafted, everyone was posting the memes, or gifs of John Gruden, the NFL coach. But anyway, I know his name came up, and people were saying, despite his success in the AHL and being highly regarded and this, that, and the other thing, that they wanted a coach who could come in and was experienced, had a lot of playoff experience, not just regular experience. I know. Obviously, Bruce Boudreau is a guy who's in need of a job. Although I think the Spangler Cup, where he was coaching the Canada roster and them not doing so hot, maybe, I don't want to say hurt his chances, but didn't help per se. I think if you go into the Spangler Cup and manage to win with like a F tier Canadian lineup, maybe your name's in the conversation a little bit more. But I know he interviewed with Ottawa back when they hired Guy Boucher, and Boudreau, that was when he went to Minnesota and signed with them. But yeah, Claude Julien, he's a guy who lives in the market too. He's seen at Sens games. He was seen at the PWHL Ottawa game, the home opener. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, he's definitely a guy who's invested in the city, and I think being bilingual is also something that I think Michael Andlauer is probably looking for, given that he's talked a lot about tapping into that Quebec side of the Ottawa River and trying to get more support from there. And anyway, all this to say, like as you mentioned, there's a few names out there. Another guy who interests me, who I've been bringing up here and there on online, is Mike Sullivan. I know Dubas gave him a vote of confidence in Pittsburgh, but I'm really interested to see if he lasts the entire season there, or in the offseason he gets let go, because he's a guy that if you're the Ottawa Senators, I think you try to scoop up immediately.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with if Sullivan is available, I think there'll be a lot of teams lining up for him. So he might have his pick of the litter of where he would want to go. Obviously, the Ottawa job is appealing with the team they have there. But yeah, I think that's again why it's best to just wait until the offseason, just because there'll be more options there. I know you mentioned Boudreau. I think I love Bruce Boudreau as much as the next guy. Like he's so candid. You want an honest coach, that's a guy who will give some good quoters to the media. But I think he's probably a little too old. I think he's pushing 70, which is what you kind of have with Martin right now. So I think someone at least a little bit younger would be more ideal. But I do love Bruce Boudreau.
And speaking of the makeup of the team and the excitement that a coach would see the roster and wanna coach there, there's a lot of talk currently about Steve Staios really pursuing a hockey deal for a veteran. So how do you feel about that? Do you think it's the right move? Is this something they should be doing? Is there somebody that kind of sticks out for you?
I mean, I feel like GMs kind of always say they're open to this. And like if it makes sense, obviously a hockey deal would be great. But I personally just don't really see it happening. Um, it's just the type of deals are really hard to pull off in the middle of the season when you kind of start having clear buyers and clear sellers. And obviously, it would have to be someone with term. They're not going to go after any rentals at this point. So I think that's a tough move to pull off. You're probably better waiting until the offseason, because you kind of see it every year. The beginning of the offseason, there's teams who are scrambling to create cap space, and they'll trade a decent player for way less than value that you would have to pay at the deadline. Like one example that springs to mind last year is Vegas trading Riley Smith to Pittsburgh for, I think it was like a 5th or 6th round pick. And I think he has 1 year left on his deal at like 5 million. Like it's not anything egregious. So,
and
Ottawa,
Riley Smith's a good player.
Exactly. And like Ottawa will have some cap space this summer, because they're probably going to, I would assume they trade Tarasenko and Kubalik at the deadline. So you'll have that cap space right there going into the summer. And then maybe there's a deal like the Riley Smith one to be made where you're taking advantage of your cap space and taking advantage of a team that is kind of desperate just to get rid of someone, to free someone up so they can sign someone else. So in theory, a hockey deal is great right now, but I think a more realistic approach is just waiting until the offseason.
Yeah, and they also have some dead cap coming off the books from Matt Murray, retaining on him. Also, Bobby Ryan's buyout finally ends this summer, so I think they will gain about 5 million additional cap space, and that's not even including the like normal cap increase that's expected to be coming this year. Now, of course, Jake Sanderson's long-term big money deal kicks in next year, but I agree. I think this summer they'll have more flexibility. I'm just wondering if they're trying to get something done in season, kind of like what they did with Jacob Chikrin last year, where it's like you have a guy with term, you want to kind of get a glimpse of how they fit into your roster prior to the following season, build some chemistry so that going into next training camp, you already kind of know where they fit in the lineup. That's kind of my hunch at maybe what they're looking at. But as you said, the cap plays quite the role. And I think until a guy like Kubalik or Tarasenko is traded, that they're going to be, I think, a little hard pressed to make some sort of move.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just like Chikrin was an obvious guy where people knew he was available for a while. I can't, maybe I'm just blanking on it, but I can't think of that type of player that's available at this deadline, like a younger-ish player who has some term, who's there for the taking. I can't think of that off the top of my head, but yeah, I think again, yeah, if there was, they should absolutely explore it, but I just personally don't see that happening.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, talking about the roster makeup, one of the big storylines that's kind of emerged since the beginning of 2024 is, does this lineup need a bigger shakeup to get to the level that they want to be, where they're competitive and they're not just competing for, I don't even want to say wild card spot because they're not even in the talk for that, but a place where they're talking about competing for a top three divisional spot, or first wild card spot. Do they need to trade someone from the core? Because some people are saying that Ottawa should trade anyone not named Kachuk, Sanderson, or Stutzla. And I just kind of want your take on whether you think that's kind of what they need to do: trade a big piece, aside from the three I just mentioned, to kind of get this thing going in a new direction.
I don't think they need to force it anyway. I think again, as a GM, you should always be sort of having an open mind to everything and seeing what's out there. But I don't think they should be forcing anything where they're trading one of those members of their core who are locked up for a while. Um, I honestly just think you kind of improve the fringes of the roster. You bring in a coach who can instill some good defensive structure and get them motivated and get them sort of playing the right way, that 200-foot game. And then hopefully you get some more saves next year. And I think that's the recipe for a turnaround right there. I don't think they sort of require any major shakeup where you're moving out someone from the core.
I think you're right. I look at it as you have to be kind of dumb to want to move a guy like Shabbat or Norris or any of those guys. And I'm pretty bullish on that, because we are still looking at a team that has the DJ Smith effect on it. This is a team that still hasn't learned how to play proper defense, hasn't learned how to win, how to have a swagger to it. And just let the systems of a new coach kind of set in, or an interim coach in this scenario. Let it set in. Let the guys figure out who they are, what their identity is as a team. And at the same time, I know there's a very, very slim possibility that the Sens become playoff contenders at this point in time in the season, but getting an addition of a guy like Shane Pinto for the rest of the season is a huge boon to the roster. You're getting your third line center back who scored 20 goals and was defensively responsible and a penalty killer. You then get to shift Ridley Gregg to the wing, where he's probably not going to be as physically dominated. Your third line suddenly gets better, and your whole roster feels that jolt of a new player coming in that's going to benefit the roster. It's hard to be in these sort of dog days of Sens fandom, because we're just like conditioned to realize that this team is going to suck around this time, and then we're going to bounce back and lose any semblance of a good pick, which I'm like, if we get a good pick this year, it is what it is. But I really need to see the team and players take a step, especially considering they did last year. Like, a lot of these guys got a lot better last year, and they kind of taken a step back. So even just getting back to what they were last year would be a benefit. But I think you're absolutely right in the sense that they don't need a shakeup. They need a couple more saves and a coach that has the right mentality from the jump. And it's unfortunate that it took 20 some odd games for DJ to be fired, because if you're in a playoff spot and at the 20 game mark, odds are you're keeping that for the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one thing too is with Tarasenko and Kubalik probably getting shipped out at the deadline, that's going to open up spots for maybe a guy like Ridley Gregg, like you said, maybe on the wing to move up the lineup and gain some confidence down the stretch of the regular season, open up ice time for some other guys who are part of the plan long term. And I think the thing is with their core too, it's like none of those contracts are bad or anything. And I'm still pretty optimistic they'll all age well over time. And you're not in any sort of cap trouble entering the offseason. So, I mean, if there's going to be a shakeup, maybe it's in the offseason with a guy like Chikrin. I know he hasn't been here that long, but because he'll be entering the final year of his contract next season. So maybe if you can't sort of hammer out an extension, maybe he's a guy you look to move as part of a bigger trade. But for all the guys who are locked up long term, I don't see any of them going anywhere.
Yeah, I know one guy in particular people have been talking about is not because he's playing poorly, it's because of the value for the points that he's bringing to the table, and that's Drake Batherson. Last year he was returning from quite the significant injury and didn't play as well. And this season, he's kind of returned to form. He's looking a lot more potent offensively. So some people are saying, hey, look, he's a guy who's making under 5 million. He's giving you near point per game offense. Is he a guy that maybe you ship out to bring in someone else just to change the mixture of the lineup? And I know you already kind of touched on this, that you wouldn't move any of the young core there, but it's just an interesting I guess topic that people are discussing online. I'm kind of in the same boat where I don't think any significant changes to the core is really the way to go. We had David Pagnotta on earlier in the season, and I think it was like September or something, and Trevor Zegras hadn't signed yet, and I was like, yeah, what's the feasibility of shaking things up down the center and doing like Josh Norris for Trevor Zegras? Obviously more on Ottawa's side going back, but
or maybe not, because Zegras is having a
oh
terrible
yeah, no.
season.
Now he's not doing so well. But it
Yeah.
was just at the time, shaking up your lineup to just get a different feel in the locker room. And it's you don't want to make a trade for the sake of making a trade. That's obviously just not going to go well. It's just more of these guys are all really close, and that's a good thing. You don't want to like totally mess that up. But when they signed like Claude Giroux, they were bringing in a player who's not just a veteran, but like a star caliber player. He's played exceptionally well during his year and a half that he's been with the Sens so far. He's a guy who changes the makeup of your locker room because he's bringing a different kind of energy. And I guess it's more so along those lines, is bringing in someone who brings that different sort of energy needed. Whether that's a guy who's a vocal leader in the locker room, whether that's someone who's, maybe isn't very vocal, but is just like on the ice is very good at their position. It's like, what is that right blend so that they can get over this 7-year drought and give fans hope, going into the new year?
Yeah, I know we touched on it earlier, but I think a new coach will bring a lot of that, right? Like that's going to sort of be a whole new culture coming in. Maybe he sees more leadership ability in certain players and tries to push that to get it out of them. So I think a coach can maybe help change the energy in a locker room. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, with the core, I think what I just want to add is they're not at that point yet. Like maybe if it's another year from now and it's looking like they're going to miss the playoffs again, then I think you definitely have to revisit it. But I'm just not at the point yet where I would be willing to shake things up just for the sake of doing so. I know you're talking about Batherson, but like that contract is like a steal too. So if you're going to be moving him, you got to be getting a really good return back. And I just don't know if that kind of deal is out there or not, but who knows?
Yeah, it's totally fair. And I mean, I know, like we talked about a little bit before recording, you're in the Toronto market. I'm sure you hear conversations like this quite often about, the core four and whether somebody needs to be shipped out to see more playoff success and get a different makeup there. So I guess Sens fans we're having our own kind of not core four moment, but does this team need some sort of shakeup to kill their own demons and get to that next level? So I think we're all having our I don't know the good wording for it, but like our little
existential crisis.
yeah, existential crisis, little campfire trauma dump and seeing, where things go from here. But that's why we're kind of just bouncing these ideas off you. It's like, how do things get turned around in Ottawa? Because I think fans have stuck with it through, the ownership changes, multiple coaches. It's I don't know. It's a lot of players in and out the door too that you got maybe one or two runs from. Eric Carlson comes to mind. Mark Stone's another. So it's like, when does the bleeding stop? When do you get to that next level where you finally don't have to worry about it anymore? You can just kind of enjoy the ride. And I think that's what we're trying to look forward to and make sense of.
Yeah, I think next year is going to be the year where if it doesn't click, then it's time to sound the alarms. Because next year it's almost going to be you're out of excuses, right? Because you're probably going to have the new coach. I mean, can't predict the future, but hopefully there's no, distractions like the stuff with Pinto this year. Hopefully you have everyone healthy to start the year. And then, yeah, that you're going to have not only a new coach who's instilling a structure, but you're going to hopefully benefit from that new coach bump that you see teams get that make a coaching change sometimes. So I think next year will be the year where if things don't start to click, then it's time to really sound the alarm. But I wouldn't hit the panic button on the organization yet or anything like that.
Yeah, I think wanting to hit the panic button is a reasonable response from people, but as we've said, a new coach is going to do wonders for you. And I think we have a solid defensive core that you can get a lot out of them. I think you just need to find the right combination for these guys. I think time will start to show itself that maybe JVD and Hamonic aren't it. But I also realized, Brandstrom might be the odd man out just because he's not tall enough. And I hate to say that because I love Brandstrom. He's one of our best defensemen, but I just cannot fathom why it's just not clicking for some of these coaches. I'd really like to see him get an opportunity, play the right side with one of the better guys like Chabot or Chikrin or Sanderson, who knows? But there's so much like opportunity and like things to be excited about with pieces of this roster that we just haven't seen come to fruition. So the coach is where it all starts. Stützle said, players are what get coaches fired, but at the same time, like players or coaches can make players. You see it every year. There's this random guy that nobody's heard of that's playing for like Mike Sullivan, and suddenly he's got 20 goals. Evan Rodriguez was a nobody until he started playing for good coaches. Like there's a reason for good coaches, and I think Ottawa is on the cusp of actually finding one and utilizing the really, really good players that they have. Unfortunately, I think it's too little too late on this season. So
it's okay. This is why in the off season we're celebrating for Celebrini, baby.
Oh boy.
Lacking for Macklin.
Oh yes.
I don't know. That's something I saw on the internet. Not quite not a perfect rhyme, but
it's close. It's all we can do.
Right?
Yeah. It's a new one every year. You gotta, get those creative juices flowing. Find something that works.
Sad because we're bad. That's all I got.
I like how you brought up Brandstrom though. He's an interesting guy to me. Just such a dynamic skater. To me, there's a lot to like about his game, but he's also one of those guys you have to wonder if he's kind of a tweener where he's not dynamic offensively enough to like be a top four guy, and he's also not strong enough defensively in those top 4 minutes where you're facing top players from the opposition, where he almost just settles into a third pairing role because he's not elite at either one. I do like him a lot, and I wouldn't give up on him or anything, but he's a guy I wonder if he's almost being blocked a bit too, right? With Sanderson, Chabot, Chychrun, all those guys shoot left. I know some of them can play the right side, and Brandstrom has before, but it seems like they always want to, you have Zub and guy who's really solid defensively in that top 4 too. So I wonder if Brandstrom might need a change of scenery at some point. But I do like him a lot as a player.
Jacques Martin even played Brandstrom as a forward, and in his first game on the fourth line, he got an assist.
And he was one of the best players that night.
Yeah, it was so
crazy.
Funny.
I saw that too, and it is like funny, but I also like, if I'm Brandstrom, I'd be kind of upset about it in the sense that, like,
absolutely.
clearly I'm a defenseman, and I feel like you see like people on Twitter and stuff making the assumption that a guy who's a defenseman who's really good offensively or has like offensive ability could just be a forward. Like it's it's totally different, right? Like when you're playing D, all the game is in front of you, and when you're playing forward, you're constantly sort of having to look back for passes and stuff. Like it's just, I don't know if it gets acknowledged enough how like difficult it would be to just play forward and defense, or just think a defenseman can all of a sudden play forward just because he has some characteristics that fit a good forward. So for Brandstrom's sake, I hope he doesn't ever have to play forward again.
Especially with Hamonic and JBD in front of him. Like,
at least JBD's gotten better, but painful. I know I was gonna say there's this one Sens fan who I don't see on Twitter anymore, but for like a couple of years straight, any single tweet the Sens made for like any Sens game where Chabot wasn't playing like stellar hockey, he would constantly just reply to the Sens like, I still don't know why you haven't moved Chabot to forward. And it's at the time where you don't have Sanderson, you don't have Chychrun. Chabot's your like only good defenseman, and it was the funniest thing. I was like, dude, our defense is already brutal. You want to take the one guy who is elite at that position and move him to forward? Oh,
yeah, just that makes no sense, especially like back then too. Like you're saying, this is pre-Sanderson and stuff. So Chabot, he's always been a big minutes eater, but there were some nights like a few years back he's playing like 30 a night, and it's like, well, who's soaking up those minutes on D if you're making this change?
Is Josh Brown and Nikita Zaitsev doing that? Like,
hey, Braden Coburn, baby, suit him up.
Mike Riley. I mean, at least Mike Riley's like kind of good. Those guys are, the thing that frustrates me about the Chabot hate and all of that is like, the guy was just an anchor for us, and in a positive way for years. And, he's tired, he's hurt, and he has to deal with a coach who doesn't know how to teach defense. And he is the whipping boy right now. And, he's taken it beautifully, but man, like, I cannot wait to see like some stability with this team so that guy can flourish again, because I really think he has the ability to go back to being just like an exceptional defenseman.
And he needs a stable partner. That honestly, that's who the Sens should go for. I know Winnipeg's doing really well, but Chabot and DeMello were like the best. Like DeMello was the best partner for Chabot. That
Pierre Dorion masterclass, man. 3rd round pick for him.
I mean, I love Marilinen, but I would so rather have DeMello right now.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah. But anyway, Josh, we're getting way off topic here. You're just sitting and experiencing, soaking in that Sens trauma. Good old Dorion years. Anyway, on that note, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you coming on, listening to our sadness, the grief, misery, hopefully the trials and tribulations of this year, and next year we get some hope and have some brighter days ahead. So For those watching or listening, you can find Josh on Twitter or X, I should say, at Josh Wegman, WEGMAN_. And you can read the articles that he puts out on the Scores app or their webpage just by looking up his name as the author. And so, yeah, Josh, anything you have coming up article wise that you want to share with the good viewers or listeners out there?
Tomorrow or Wednesday, I might have some takeaways from the Nylander extension. I know that might not apply to Sens fans, maybe eager to read that, but there's some takeaways in there that are more league wide than just team specific. So that's something to check out coming up.
Cool. Yeah, it'll be interesting because I have a feeling you'll touch on salary cap stuff. So that'll definitely be interesting for people to give a read. So thank you for that. And like I said, thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll have you again on in the not too distant future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.